All righty, how's everybody? Well, good, thumbs up. So, of course, yesterday in lab, we started talking about marine tetrapods, and now we're gonna be in the Triassic oceans. So you guys, believe it or not, have spent 2 whole weeks away from fishes. So we're gonna come back to fishes for a little bit to talk about what's going on with all these different lineages of cartilaginous and different bony fishes in the Triassic. But then also, all these different interesting animals that went into the water, tetrapods that re-entered the oceans during the Triassic. So as you guys saw in like our lab yesterday, after the end Permian extinction, ecosystems are pretty wiped clean. And so there's a lot of really interesting evolutionary experimentation. That's how you can think of it. Many clades have what we would call an adaptive radiation in the Triassic. There's many new species, many new body plans that then, as time goes on, fill in, and you've got 10 species that have the same kind of body plan. But really early on, the common pattern across all animal clades in these big events is really quickly evolving new body forms. And then kind of biodiversity, meaning like number of species, is something that comes later. And that's something that's really knowable from the fossil record. So today's, like I said, a focus on the oceans. Here's a couple of beautiful Triassic organisms. I hope you can see, you can't see quite the head of the one up top, with one down low, has really interesting teeth. It's about to crush up a clam. And so as tetrapods adapt to the oceans, they get all these new ecologies to get after this new habitat. So let's jump in. So you guys have seen this slide already, but because we're like officially going into the Triassic, we're going to be here now for a couple of weeks. The next 2 weeks are all Triassic. So we're finally in the Mesozoic era at the very beginning. When you're thinking about biogeography, when you're thinking about evolution in the Triassic, always remember that for the most part, everything is united in Pangaea, one big supercontinent. There are these really interesting islands off here during Pangean times that are now blocks in southern China. And so there's like kind of endemic plants and all kinds of really weird things out on those islands, which is really cool to think about. We don't have a good animal fossil record from there. An overall pattern is just like the Permian. We're continuing a world that's getting warmer and relatively drier. So there's big deserts on Pangaea. Today, we're talking about the marine ecosystems. And so you guys know what this is. We talked about this yesterday in lab quite a bit. Not only is a lot of invertebrate evolution happening, we're getting our first lobstery things and our first clams and our first modern snails and all that kind of stuff. But there's these tetrapods and lots of fishes. And then, of course, all this stuff on land we're going to talk about on Thursday, and then all week next week, land-based stuff. Today, though, we're staying in the oceans. And so here's where we're going to start. We're working our way back through the vertebrate tree. So all the way back to our gnathostomes, or sorry, our agnathan fishes, not our gnathostomes, our jawless fishes. And so you guys have known that ever since the Devonian, when all those armored ones went extinct, the only jawless fishes left were the lampreys, which are still alive, the hagfishes, which are still alive, and the conodonts. I hope you guys remember conodonts as these little weirdos that were really good for biostratigraphy. They have these things that we call teeth, or like oral apparatus kind of thing. They're not quite teeth, they're phosphatic in their structure, but they're really highly ornamented, really different from one another. And so ever since the Cambrian, all the way through the entire Paleozoic era and into the Triassic, conodonts are these really excellent index fossils. If you find a conodont fossil, you can use it to help you get an idea of how old the rock is. So that's true all through the Paleozoic and across the Permo-Triassic boundary and into the Triassic. But you guys can see, we haven't talked about it yet, but the end of the Triassic is another one of those big mass extinctions, and conodonts do not make it through the Triassic period to the outside. They don't make it through into the next period, the Jurassic. They die at the end of the Triassic. And so what's really cool to me is these things have been extremely useful. Here's geological time on the left-hand side of the screen there. And here's all these different conodonts that you can recognize throughout time, the way geologists can break up the rock record. Once you get into the Triassic, though, you can't use conodonts because when we get into the Jurassic, there's no more conodonts. And actually these invertebrates, ammonites, which you guys have heard and seen on some of the slides already, think words like ammonoids, which is the bigger group, or different cephalopods, different octopus things with shells, have been around all through the Paleozoic, some with really long pointy shells, some with really crazy shaped shells. But once we get into the Triassic, there's a time when Triassic ammonites overlap with Triassic conodonts. Conodonts go extinct, and then through the Jurassic, and then the next period, the Cretaceous, some of the best biostratigraphic index fossils are ammonites. And so if you're a geology person, you might care about this, but this is where I put it biologically. You go from fancy pants teeth to fancy pants shells being your best way to correlate marine rocks. And that turnover happens here in these Triassic oceans. I'm not even going to say anything to you guys about lampreys and hagfish. We have basically no fossils of them from the Triassic. So I say they just keep on trucking. Don't worry about it. They're still alive. So those are our jawless fishes. What's going on with them in the Triassic, big picture wise. Now let's talk about the chondrichthyans. So you guys met two groups of ratfishes of today, and then the elasmobranchs. And so all you're seeing on the screen right now, I put a dotted line here. So here's your imations over here. Here's two of the elasmobranch groups you guys met back in the Carboniferous and the Permian. So xenacants and hybodonts. Xenacants are freshwater forms. They're kind of eely, very long bodied with a long dorsal fin, big spine on their head. Xenacants are mostly freshwater. They also go extinct at the end of the Triassic. We won't talk about them too much. They have really interesting teeth. Hybodonts are really close relatives of the living groups of sharks and rays, the living elasmobranchs. Hybodonts are big predators all throughout Mesozoic oceans. We're going to talk about them a lot more in class later because there's some pretty interesting hybodonts, especially in the Cretaceous. I wanted to show you guys this because it's one of my favorite papers kind of all time. It just made me so happy. This was the cover of the Journal of Vertebrate Paleontology when it came out. This is a hybodont freshwater shark. So plenty of these sharks live in freshwater ecosystems all throughout the Triassic and the Jurassic and the Cretaceous. If you were to go to like any pond or lake, there's probably little sharks in it, which I think is great. And this is a fossil record from Kyrgyzstan of this really shallow lake. And these right here are shark eggs. And then there's little shark teeth they find. And so this is like a little hybodont nursery. So a lot of sharks today like reproduce where they all lay their eggs in the same kind of spot if they lay eggs. And then you have a lot of little baby sharks growing up together like amongst the vegetation. And so this is just this really beautiful site. We're going to talk about it later when we talk about land because it's a freshwater preserved ecosystem with lots of really interesting reptiles in it. This one's dead in this piece of art. But I was just really delighted that they had all these fossils of these teeny tiny little shark teeth and these teeny tiny, well, they're not that teeny tiny, they're like as big as your hand, shark eggs from this site. So keep that in the back of your mind that all throughout the age of dinosaurs, there's little sharks in all the lakes and streams. And that's kind of hybodont. And this is a site from the Triassic. It's from like right about here in the middle Triassic, this like shark nursery from Kyrgyzstan, which today is in like the middle of Asia. And of course, you don't think about it as being very wet at all. But the really important thing to talk about for you guys, and the thing that's relevant to our world today, is that in the Triassic, sometime near the end of the Triassic, we have a split between the two living groups of elasmobranchs that are around right now. And those are kind of the rays and what I'm going to call colloquially sharks, although of course they have a fancier name. And I mean like the true sharks. All the living animals today that you would call a shark are in that arrow sharks. And so you guys have seen, of course, jokes and things like that on social media or things where, you know, sharks have been around, sharks are older than trees. And that's true that something that kind of looks like this has been around since the Devonian. But the actual diversity of animals you guys call sharks splits from things you call rays in the Triassic, and we don't really have the crown group of sharky sharks until the Jurassic. But there's things that are pretty sharky that do go back a long ways. So there is a name for that group. The new sharks, the Neosalacii. So every living elasmobranch, every living stingray, and every living shark is a Neosalacian. It's another word for the crown group of elasmobranchs. People, when they talk about these animals today, often use the word elasmobranch, but technically elasmobranchs does include these fossil groups that are no longer around. Another thing is that there's plenty of them in freshwater ecosystems too, even through today with some rays. The other group of chondrichthyans are those holocephalans. Back in the Carboniferous and the Permian, you guys saw all those amazing, like ones with horns, one with like buzzsaw teeth, all kinds of interesting stuff. Really only the living clade, these little ratfishes that are still alive right now, make it out through the Paleozoic, and they, as far as we can tell, keep on trucking throughout the Mesozoic. I actually really couldn't tell you too much about their fossil record even during the Mesozoic. I don't want to put you on the spot. Do you know if there's like a ratfish fossil record?
It's not terrible.
Okay.
Their teeth and spines kind of throughout the Mesozoic.
Okay, so you can find
way less common than like sharks, right? I think like I want to say like the earliest crown group holocephals was probably Jurassic.
Probably Jurassic for the living diversity.
Yeah.
But there's something like this going for a long time. Okay. Yeah, thank you. But they do, as far as I know, this is my understanding, they remain like pretty much the thing, that not, you know, exactly, but like very similar to the forms we have today, all throughout this time. So we're trying to like get this holistic view here of all this vertebrate diversity you guys have met and helping integrate it with the animals that are still alive right now. So just to drive home how awesome some of these animals are, sharks and rays today I think are always really underappreciated. Usually when you guys study in biology, you like maybe dissect a little dogfish shark, and on a phylogeny or in some anatomy book or whatever you might learn about these animals, it's always like a pretty normal looking shark as like the outgroup to all the other things people talk about. So I just wanted to give you guys a little picture of their modern biodiversity. So there's that split, the crown group, elasmobranchs and Eosalacei, into what I'm gonna call rays over here and what I'm gonna call sharks over here. And so these are the animals in that ray group, technically called batoids. Some of them I'm sure you recognize, some of them maybe you don't. And then there's two really big clades of these animals I'm gonna call sharks, squalomorphs, sorry, and galeomorphs. And you can see there's different in these clades. Sometimes there's only 9, sometimes there's. I think the living sharks and rays, the living elasmobranchs, are some of the coolest animals. Do me a favor, talk to your neighbors. Do you recognize all these things? These are all animals you could go see right now. They're all alive. Chat with each other about this biodiversity.
We know what the common name is for one school.
No.
That's like. I never been involved in like spotlights.
Actually,
Actually, we could start with this. Oh, wait, that's it.
well,
There's so much to get some. Well, I think like sharks is. Yeah.
I certainly haven't seen that one.
Yeah, it was those modified. Yeah, that's, yeah. There's like the, just stop it. I know. That's. One of those things, I believe that's the. It's amazing. It's negotiation.
So what are people, what are we noticing? What are we talking about? There's a lot of interesting fun patterns in elasmobranchs.
Brandon, you know any like common names for a swallow-form shark or whatever that is? I've never seen that one.
Well, this one is just like the most ridiculously shaped of all of them. So it's the one I like. So things like dogfishes,
Oh,
like just the shark that you dissect in your anatomy class, that's a swallow-form shark. Little pajama sharks, little epaulet sharks, the ones that can walk, they're sharks that walk. In Australia, bamboo sharks, they're swallow-forms.
Huge diversity in mouth parts and feet structure.
Tons of mouth parts, tons of feeding strategies, a lot of getting flat in different ways, resting on the bottom or not, which is fun. How do you like the fact that like that's your saw fish up there, the really big one, that could be like 15 feet long, you can catch it in Florida, don't not put it back in the water if you catch it. And then this is a saw shark. Again, a gigantic nose, this one's got big whiskers on it, but with these like tooth structures on the outside, totally not related to each other, which is pretty fun. All your sharks that are gonna maybe bite you and it's a bad news situation are in these two groups. Great white sharks are here. Great whites I always feel bad for because like they always bite you and like you don't have a leg anymore, so you're gonna bleed out, but they're also like, oh gosh, sorry. They like almost never eat somebody. They do kill you. Whereas these sharks, Some of them, tigers, bulls, are the ones that will be like, okay, and actually eat you. So watch out for these ones. And I always feel bad for, maybe you guys don't share that with me. I always feel bad for great white sharks because they don't ever mean it. They're just so big, but it doesn't work out. Whale sharks, big filter feeding sharks, are in this clade. Basking sharks, which are big filter feeding sharks, are in this clade. Mantas, which are gigantic filter feeders, are in this clade. So that's interesting. A lot of stuff going on there. We're going to talk about some of this diversity in the Mesozoic oceans lecture we'll have later, and then we'll have a Cenozoic oceans lecture, kind of like a Jurassic Cretaceous one, and then like a Cenozoic one. So we'll come back to these because this is the living diversity. And so these animals don't show up in the Triassic. What happens in the Triassic is this split happens. And once we get into the Jurassic, these clades start to show up. And that's a pattern that keeps going all the way up until the present. These, of course, are all modern species. Giant filter feeding rays are a Cenozoic thing. Like after dinosaurs are extinct from the asteroid is when those evolved. So we're going to talk about a lot of those patterns later. But I can't not show you guys cool sharks because it's very tempting to talk about dinosaurs and reptiles now for the rest of class. And I have to pump the brakes a little bit. All right. So that was our agnathan fishes, our cartilaginous fishes. Here's another dotted line. Let's talk about in the oceans, the lobe-finned osteichthyans, the sarcopterygians. So there are now no more tetrapodomorph fishes, right? For the sarcopterygians, there's lungfish, coelacanths, and tetrapods that are now all on land unless they somehow choose to go back into the oceans, but they're still tetrapods. So the fishy sarcopterygians are now only the lungfishes and the coelacanths. I have this on there. I told you guys back when we talked in the Carboniferous about biodiversity, lungfishes don't ever get as like different and diverse in terms of their body plans and their mouth structures than they did in the Devonian. They basically have this really similar morphology that all three living species share now. So I'm not going to say too much about lungfishes. You'll see them again a little later, but they're pretty much doing lungfish things all the way till right now in freshwater ecosystems. Coelacanths, however, are pretty spicy in the Triassic. Just like in the Devonian, lungfishes kind of had their heyday. It's kind of heyday for coelacanth, like body plans and biodiversity, and like kind of number of species even, is really high in the Triassic period. So in oceans for the most part, but a little bit in fresh water, there's a lot of kinds of coelacanths in the Triassic. I'm going to let you enjoy some of them. So try to look at these animals, think about what their ecologies might be out there in the oceans. There's fossils for most of them, beautiful artwork for some. Rapellia was just named last year. It's only a year old now as being a named taxon of coelacanth. But yeah, do me a favor, talk to your neighbors about these coelacanths for a second. That's a good yeah.
That's a good one. I don't know what you guys do. I think that's just like what did oh yeah. I know there's yeah, they're like the general looks like really cruising around high speeds, whereas shrink is airfish.
Downward, sloping metal that presumably means that guys always been following. It wasn't. It's a different mountain. It's such a really unique track to see.
Any ideas about these guys? Phareia is one that when it very pleased. I like remember my Twitter feed popping up with this one. I think it's from 2015 is when it got named, and I was like, "That's a great fish. And that's a great art." So they have a couple specimens of it. Here's the whole skeleton. It's cut off because I don't know why the screen's not giving you all of it. But when you check the slides later, you'll be able to see the whole skeleton's there. It has this face, almost like a beak, very intensely tall and short. Very parrotfish-like, you know, parrotfishes, animals today that like crunch on corals and other kind of hard parts of reefs. So that's really interesting. One thing we can do with fishes that's really interesting is even if you have, you know, chondrichthyans, coelacanths, all the different actinopterygians, there's so many fish alive today, and fish body plans, you know, if you want to be a pursuit predator, if you want to be an animal that's like living in nooks and crevices, if you want to be this long eely thing, there's so many ways we can learn about how living fishes use their body plans to function really well ecologically. So when we see an animal like this, which is a coelacanth, but it has this body plan, we can actually tell a lot about what its lifestyle was. This thing is almost certainly living in a reef system. It doesn't move quickly, but it moves really well in 3 dimensions. It's got all these fins on all sides. That's really cool that we can kind of ground truth those kind of ideas. And so when I was talking earlier that coelacanths in the Triassic are really diverse, Rebellatrix is this fantastic predatory coelacanth with this torpedo body and a hugely powerful tail. In this artwork, it's chasing and eating another small species of coelacanth. And so we don't think about coelacanths as like barracudas and herring, but there's different kinds of coelacanths in the Triassic oceans, like filling these different roles, which is really fun. This fossil here is one of the tails from the Rebellatrix right there. And so one thing I never told you guys about coelacanths, but you can look at it on the living one and you can see it in all these. One thing that coelacanths do that's very different from most other fishes is their notochord, it's not really their notochord, right? Their vertebral column continues all the way back into their tail. That's something that the living coelacanth has. So you have like this like top dorsal caudal fin, this ventral caudal fin, but like actually the vertebrae are all the way to here. And there's a little nubbin of a tail right there. And that's true for almost all coelacanths. So next time you're on your computer, Google like the living coelacanth that has this little teeny funny tail that is derived from a heterocircle where the vertebrae go up into the tail. But only coelacanths do that. And so it's really fun to me to imagine like a predatory open water coelacanth. It's very different. There's some things like this one. This one's from freshwater ecosystems. You can find it in Arizona, which is pretty funny. Crushes up stuff, we think, with its face. Probably freshwater shells. Interesting animals. Any other comments on coelacanths? Yeah, sir.
So the thing about the vertebrae in the tail, is that like give them like a different way of swimming?
They have like very much an even keel to like top to bottom. And other fishes, we're going to talk about the teleost actinopterygians today. There's ways that if you have like a ventral and dorsal part of your tail that are like evenly distributing power, that gives you some different kinds of maneuverability. But I'm ignorant to tell you if that's like better in some way. I kind of doubt it, but it's what they do. And so these little nubbins here, like that is a vertebral column right there, like sticking out the back. Very different. All right. So there was our agnathan fishes, our chondrichthyan fishes, our non-tetrapod sarcopterygian fishes, and now we're going to get more into these actinopterygians, which you guys know, these are like the most biodiverse vertebrates today, the ray-finned bony fishes. And so now we're going to see the diversification of them really pick up. And when I say the diversification, I mean of the living groups. You've seen a lot of actinopterygians already in the Carboniferous and the Permian. And so this lineage, which I showed you guys those videos of, is the one today that can like walk around and breathes air, lets us know about that basic osteichthyan ancient condition back in the Silurian, really, is this fish that's totally still alive, called B-shears or the reed fish. This actinopterygian lineage split from the others way back in the Devonian. The only other living actinopterygian, crown group actinopterygian split that happened in the Paleozoic was this lineage, which are the sturgeons and the paddlefish today, split from all the rest of these guys. And that happened back in the Permian. So these are 2 Paleozoic divergences. And then this has always been floating whenever we've talked about actinopterygians, and now we can finally start to break it up a little bit. So in the Triassic, a separate lineage that leads to today's gars shows up. Gars are these very fun armored fishes with these long snouts full of teeth. Those are the living ones. I'm showing you living biodiversity right now. In the Mesozoic, for all these lineages, the fishes can look very different on these lineages. Bowfin, or that's what you guys have been seeing in lab, those fishy skulls that you've looked at, those are bowfin skulls. The bowfin lineage and the gar lineage are separate from each other in the Triassic. And then finally, this gigantic lineage here, which is one of the most important clades of vertebrates on the planet, are the teleosts. If you've never heard that word before, put it in your brain. Teleost is a very, very, very important clade, a very big word in vertebrate biodiversity, vertebrate evolution. Like whatever there are 70,000 species of vertebrates and like 28,000 of them are teleos. So it's a lot of, or even 30,000 of them are teleos. This is what we mean when we talk about ray-finned actinopterygian biodiversity. It's really actually teleos. And so we have fossils for the gar lineage, the bowfin lineage, and the teleos lineage that all come to the recovery period from the end Permian mass extinction. These lineages are almost certainly part of aquatic and marine ecosystems reassembling themselves in the wake of that event. And so that is very cool to tie like living biodiversity into adaptive radiations that happened in response to an extinction 250 million years ago. And so, like I said, these are Triassic events, and I want to talk to you guys about teleos. So if we take the modern diversity of actinopterygians, I really like this figure. Here's all the like technical terms that I'm not giving you guys for the clade, the actual taxonomy of Actinopterygii. You can see sister to everybody else are bichirs, or this clade, this is the little reedfish one. There's 2 genera. These numbers that are in parentheses here are how many living genera there are. 2, 2, 4, 1, 2, at least 4,500 living genera of Actinopterygians. So over there, there's that walking in a fish tank. I love it so much. Early Actinopterygian, the reedfish or the bichir. There's 12 species in 2 genera today. This clade right here, if you put them together, 29 species in 6 genera. Paddlefishes are these big, awesome filter feeders today. Sturgeons living on the bottom, scooping up mud, crushing up stuff. They got armor on their back. I think they look very prehistoric. If you don't know, sturgeons are where caviar comes from. So these big fishes are very fun. But again, that's their diversity on the Actinopterygian spectrum. Here's this clade. They go together. 1 genus of bowfin with, I think, only 2 species, and 2 genera of gar with 6 or 7 species. Here's gars and bowfins today. And that is just so funny to me to put next to this monstrous living clade of fishes called the teleos. 4,500 genera and at least 30,000 species. And so yes, things like tunas and marlins and seahorses and everything in Nemo is a teleos, which is pretty cool. I have 3 characters I want to give you guys to unite teleos. This is a really important clade. All 3 of these characters are really important and they're very different from each other. So here's your 3 synapomorphies for teleos. They have homocircle tails. So what I mean by that is hypercircle tails. You'll remember where the vertebrae go up into the dorsal fin. That is the ancestral condition for osteostracans plus gnathostomes. So ever since way back in the Paleozoic, everybody's had a heterocircle tail. If you're a fish, where the vertebra goes up, unless you do something weird, which coelacanths did, lungfish did, but the sharks and all that have a heterocircle tail. A homocircle tail is where the vertebral column evenly hits the center of the tail at the base, and then there's these radial structures that come off at the base of the actual fin, and so there's the end of the vertebrae right in there. And so you have a like symmetrical dorsoventral symmetry in the tail. That tail has equal power up and down. That fish can move forward very well. And so again, that heterocircle tail is ancestral. Things like sharks are still swimming around with that ancient heterocircle tail. And even a lot of living actinopterygians that aren't teleos will show you that heterocircle tail. Here's a sturgeon with a heterocircle tail. So the homocircle tails are in teleos. Another feature that teleos get that is just spectacular is this specialized set of pharyngeal jaws. So in what you guys would think of as their throat, they have another set of bony elements that are covered in teeth, and they can use them to process food. And actually they can use them to make sound, to do all kinds of other interesting things as well. So here's a fish with its jaws, its premaxilla, its dennary full of teeth. Swallows something, here's where its gill, on the outside there'd be a gill cover here, but inside in its mouth, there's another set of jaws in its throat that it can use to process food. Here's an eel. This is probably one of the coolest examples of a teleos pharyngeal jaw. So here's an eel skull, maxilla, premaxilla, dentary. Here's the pharyngeal jaws set way back into its throat. And so eels can do this thing where when they bite a fish, they can hold on to it, and then their scary jaws come from the back of their throat to actually grab the fish and pull it in. Which you guys probably don't think about too much, but it's not so nice. Snakes wish they had a set of pharyngeal jaws. They do not. So pharyngeal jaws are something that lets these fishes have a lot of very different dietary adaptations. A lot of the ecological diversity of teleosts almost certainly has to do with how they eat. There are trophic levels. And so these pharyngeal jaws are part of that adaptive suite of features you can use to be a dietary specialist. And then the last feature is sort of related to that. Teleosts have a mobile premax. If any of you have ever caught a fish, this is what fishes usually look like when they're living their little fishy lives. And I mean teleosts when I say fishy lives right now. A teleost looks like this, but when it wants to, it can go like whoop, and open its mouth. When you guys do this, if you have a 3-year-old who makes like a fishy face and they go like whoop, whoop, like a goldfish, this is that mobile premaxilla. That front bone that has teeth on it can swing out. All the bones of the face are used to like push out and make this like extended tube. This creates like a negative space, a vacuum, so that fishes can swim up to their food and go like suck it in, because they create a negative space by like inflating their oral cavity in this way. But we can see in the fossil record often when that maxilla becomes separate from all the other bones in the skull, except for a connection there on the midline, and it can be the front of that opening, that fishy mouth face. So there's a perch living its life, and here's a perch that has its maxilla, premaxilla anyway, swung forward. You can see how that mobile premaxilla is also something that's going to be advantageous for catching food and processing things. So it's interesting to think about those, like the bowfin you saw, the gar, sturgeon. These are all actinopterygians, they're all ray fin fishes, but they don't have that thing that you guys, I think usually, if you've ever seen like a cartoon fish, it's probably doing something like that kind of thing. And that's the teleosts only actually that do that. So I have been only showing you living teleosts, or sorry, living actinopterygians. This is a living taxon. These are both living taxa. These are a living taxa. And then the lionfish, the goldfish, the tuna, the tarpon, those are all living species today. So I shouldn't really have those in your head when you're thinking about the Triassic. I want to show you some Triassic actinopterygian diversity. So this is quite a slide. Time is here on the left: Silurian, Devonian, Carboniferous, Permian, and then Triassic. I hope you can see these little shaded areas correspond. This is the Permian one, this is the Triassic one, this is the Carboniferous one. I hope that makes sense. And then if you look, this is 0 to 1 relative proportion of the fishes in the ecosystem, of the fish ecosystem that is made up of actinopterygian fishes. Brown is freshwater, purple is marine. That means the ocean. There's a lot going on in this figure. I'm really curious what you guys notice, but I want you to take a few minutes, talk to your neighbors, make some interpretations of this figure.
First thing that sounds to me is that fish in Triassic are like ginormous. Yeah, you know, and most of them are yeah, not really. They don't like they dominate like the like for instance, the Lonians with the they aren't like dominant. Then the part, then in the Carboniferous, I mean, well, then, I mean, and then in Permian, in the Triassic, right, just like, it looks like that dominate. Carboniferous or almost sort of tails, like the. That's not. Interesting how I'm sure really kind of like small, thin, breast ones. That long, and shows up 15-7, and weird, and anatomical differences between like the time, I know, like, as time goes on, the water, like, you actually call it deflection of the sun. Really not like your body, but it's kind of neat to see it show up by standards. I did not realize that there's one flag that showed up in Triassic. It's funny. But it's like
Start off with that.
Or there's on the slide, like fast. I would say like.
Yes.
There, that's how big they are.
To each other, yeah.
It's about better, year long, but the funny picture.
The big tall one at the top is like,
Yes,
you caught it, and you were on the boat. The one that's a rectangle, the one that's a diamond shape is like this big.
Right.
What are things that you could take home from this figure?
That in the Triassic, that the Actinopterygii fishes like dominate,
Okay, so what do you mean?
like marine or not.
With this part of the figure? you're talking
Yes.
about? So you guys already saw when I did the Devonian lectures where it was like, there's not really a lot of Actinopterygians in all those Devonian ecosystems, and then as soon as we went to the Carboniferous, it was like, oh, there's a lot of, I think it was light blue. So Actinopterygians is like, oh, 30, 40, 60, 30, 40, 50, 50, 60, 40% of the fish species in any given locality are Actinopterygians in the Carboniferous. And now you're saying, when you get up to the Triassic, you're getting to what I would call the modern condition, where 9 out of 10 or more of the fishes you're gonna catch randomly are Actinopterygians. And we are still living in a world that's what it's like if we're talking about the fish faunas in the ocean or in fresh water.
Also, you know, like the fish themselves, like they appear to be like bigger in size, you know, like if we kind of look at like this, it's like a timeline.
Yeah, I'm not 100% sure how complete this is, but I think that's probably pretty fair. These fishes are all meant to be drawn to scale. And certainly the ones up in the Triassic there look like they're the biggest fishes, which is interesting. There's still plenty of teeny tiny ones, right? That's important. I heard a lot of people talking when I walked around about the body plans. So fishes are super plastic in terms of like what their body shape is. Different clades evolve the same body plans again and again. This thing is not at all in any of the living groups of Actinopterygian fishes, but it certainly looks a lot like a little butterfly fish or an angelfish kind of thing. It's a completely not that, but that body plan, very flat side to side, very tall, pretty probably. I bet it has wonderful colors, but I'll never know. You know, that is a thing that evolves a lot. These fishes that kind of look like predators, like long needly fishes, there's fishes like that today. None of these are a part of today's living biodiversity. The clades that they might look like, not part of this radiation. There are no modern barracudas, there's no modern angelfish, there's no modern parrotfish or whatever you might think of. These are all fish body plans. And those body plans can tell us a lot about their ecologies, but in terms of their diversity on the phylogeny, they are not part of the living groups. Everybody's got a head or circle tail for a long time. Even this guy going up the top, which is really fun, right? Okay, so what I wanted you guys to take away from this was this just diversity and disparity. Disparity is a good word to talk about the diversity of the body types. And then the fact that it's kind of like a Permo-Carboniferous like grade up until you get into the Triassic, and after that extinction reset, Actinopterygians are everywhere. Okay, this is another figure from the same paper that I like quite a bit. One of the things that happens when you talk about fish evolution is teleosts today are so like overweighted. There's 30,000 species, like, you know, whatever, almost half of vertebrates are teleosts. That's crazy. So everybody thinks teleosts are the best and the most diverse. But if we actually count and look at the different species of Actinopterygian that are alive in these periods, I'm gonna have you look at this. Everything in the blue are stem group members or maybe early crown group members of that clade that has the gar and the bowfin today. So there's only 8 species of that right now. These are all part of that clade. Everything in the yellow is not in the crown group of all the living teleosts today, the common ancestor of all of today's teleosts. It's on the stem of that. And all of these are members of that teleost today, common ancestor of like an eel and a barracuda. And these are crown group members in red, stem group members in yellow, and then members of the gar/bowfin lineage in blue. I'm a little bummed it's kind of cut off there. I don't know why I can't get that fixed. These are almost all Triassic fishes though. Talk to your neighbors for a second about this distribution.
Areas represent change. These legal. I sit down in articles. Very good.
So it's also looking at it's like I'm part of it, it's like that's what I'm showing like keep that take over right away. But these are around interpreting things, I'm not aware of this papers are or you. Just try out.
Yo.
This is late trials, they're all trials. Yeah, yeah. You have the age of like times. One of the options.
Okay, here's what I wanted you. I intentionally gave you this and had you be like, what is he, what, I don't even know what to say, it just looks like a lot of fish. And you guys are probably reaching what I'm judging to be like the limit of what fish content. What I like about this paper so much is it's really easy to be like, wow, teleosts today are so diverse, they're the baller fishes, I bet back when they showed up, they took over. What I like about this is, this paper is literally about the opposite of that. There's the title of this paper. So these people didn't say, I wonder, wow, look at these fishes, so many kinds of fishes. They quantified it. They did a lot of stats on all these different body plans. And they were able to show that like these early teleosts versus that garbofin versus the ones that are nothing to do with today's biodiversity, but I would say pretty interesting body shapes. There's really no evidence for like this group, which is the group today that's hyper diverse, being like, whoa, right from the beginning, they were radiating like crazy. And I just think that's kind of fun. Negative evidence to counterbalance the idea we all have in our heads that teleosts, because they're so diverse today, have always been that way. And so I show you this because I always think it's sad to draw, like, this is the gar lineage. There's 8 species today, and then you guys think gars are these ancient fishes that want to look back to the Triassic. These things are on the gar lineage, and that one up there looks like a gar, but a lot of them kind of don't. I just think that's nice. There's always cool fish. That's my rule. And basically, when I show you cool fish, until we get to almost the end of the Cretaceous when dinosaurs go extinct, if you think it looks like a fish, you know, it's not that fish. So here's some actual Triassic actinopterygian species, or genera, I should say, just for you to take in. Actual fossils. You saw Bergeria yesterday, a big predator. Serichthys is this awesome, probably surface feeder. There's fishes today like barracuda and needlefish that grab little things on the surface of the water, not related to them today. One of the most fun fishes that came out, this was now, gosh, 12 or 13 years ago, Potenichthyes. Anybody notice anything about Potenichthyes? Talk to your neighbors about Potenichthyes. What's going on here?
Yeah, like either of those. Big pectoral birds. I don't think we're guys. I'm very good shape. Oh, no.
So that's what, so just to be really clear, Potenichthyes has nothing to do with flying fish. The living clade of fishes that can fly, this is not their relative. This is a different Triassic actinopterygian lineage that has big pectoral fins, big secondary wing, you could call them pelvic fins, and then an extension of the ventral part of its caudal fin, because when flying fishes today jump out of the water, they can go like and stay aloft if their tail keeps touching the water as they're flying. So in case you've never really seen a flying fish in detail, here's a photo of one today with big pectoral fins, pelvic wings, and then an extension of the caudal fin ventrally so they can keep staying aloft and not get eaten by whoever's chasing their school. Here's a fish that has nothing to do phylogenetically with this fish, but how ridiculous. And so again, get in your boat in the Triassic, gonna go catch an ammonite, you're gonna have a moment where you scare a bunch of Potenichthyes fly out. That's nice. Okay, enough of the fish. So you guys saw this last week, thinking about all the different levels of vertebrate evolution, and in this case, we're talking about the tetrapods with this focus, all the many splits that have already happened by the time we're into the Triassic. The Paleozoic era contained most of those splits. So now we can kind of go around and talk about these lineages that are doing their own things in the Triassic. And so let's start with the amphibians when we get to the Triassic. Because we're staying in the oceans today, I'm only going to touch on the stuff that's happening in the oceans. We'll go around that Paleozoic ring on Thursday for all these different origins. You guys saw this in lab yesterday. It's the only other time I'm showing it to you. It's the exact same thing I showed you in lab yesterday. I just think it really belongs here and it's worth saying. One time, as far as we can tell, in all of Earth history, a lineage of amphibians, and this is a stereospondyle, if you remember back from the Carboniferous, evolved to live a semi-marine or brackish water lifestyle, maybe even going out into the true open ocean. So you can see they have these really fun kind of crocodile-y heads. There's the nostrils, there's the eyeballs. Trematosaurs. That's a great name, huh? Panorama. Everybody loves a marama, right? So anyway, I can't not show you that. There are marine amphibians. I liked very much that yesterday in lab, several of you were like, what is that color? And it's just 2 seconds of marine amphibian. I wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't show it to you. But all right, let's talk about the reptiles, because that's what we've been trying to build towards today. So if you remember, we've been talking about synapses on land for the last couple of weeks. We've been talking mostly about the mammal line stuff. In the Paleozoic, in the Permian for the most part, the reptile record is relatively sparse. There's good fossils of these para-reptiles, and so some of them, like these little burrowing ones, survive the extinction and make it through the Triassic. We'll come back to them when we talk about land. But when you focus on reptile evolution in the Triassic, what you'll see is the living groups today, archosaurs, so that's things like crocodiles, birds, and turtles today, and lepidosaurs, that's things like snakes and lizards and the tuatara today. They must have diverged from each other at the very end of the Permian, but most of their good fossil record, and again, we'll talk about that on Thursday, is in the Triassic. What's really complicated about reptile evolution in the Triassic is that there's multiple lineages, ichthyosaurs, these are the plesiosaurs. These marine reptiles show up almost immediately. Look how close we are to the boundary, and we get the first emergence of these marine reptile clades. Because all we have is their fossils, that means all we have to understand their relationships is their anatomy. And some of them are already so clearly adapted to be marine that it's really hard to tell if like they're related to these reptiles, they're related to each other. It's a mess. It's a really interesting problem. That's why I have a dashed line here for ichthyosaurs. I'm not 100% sure where ichthyosaurs go, and nobody is, which I think is really fun. So marine reptiles happen a lot. Oh, sorry, I turned off the modern day archosaurs and the modern day lepidosaurs to show you Triassic versions of both of those animals. And in these three clades, the archosaurs, the plesiosaurs, and these ichthyosaurs, there's multiple lineages, sometimes in these different bigger groups, that adapt to a marine habitat. Let's talk about them. You guys saw that yesterday. I won't belabor it, but part of that story are these weird Triassic marine reptiles. Okay, here's our first one. Hoopisuchians and thalattosaurs. I'm gonna let you just take a minute, talk to your neighbors. I'll let you tell me what's going on with these guys.
Trying to figure out why they're really very high. So they theorize that it's kind of intelligent. It's full of day.
Yeah.
Yeah. There was very odd, but it's really they show up like that makes the they must be trying to eat this quite more.
Yes.
And it's like they do they don't really they have big chests. And they only show up like one person in China.
Yeah, see,
Yeah, there's, I don't think those old like, we'll say.
abdomen or
So yeah, the suki's are really fun. Yeah, they get slotted amongst the dinosaurs, but. And the last time long and sitting on like they're talking that. That's those bottom. It's a little less. Even though they're attached. Yeah, like kind of.
Yeah, just you swoop it in, you can get a bunch of fish.
Yes. It was again, awesome.
Wonder where they took their.
Probably not.
Swampy.
They didn't get quite, they didn't have a ton of time to get really. They, as you can see, they kind of appear and disappear inside of, I think they live 6 million years.
Yeah, so how do you guys, I mean, this is insane, right? Like. It's like a flash in the pan sort of thing. We have a few million years of this clade over here. I don't want to say that I don't like them, but I don't get it at all. One of the things I showed you yesterday on that slide that was just like a big summary of early marine reptile biodiversity was one of the ones that looks like a platypus that's in this clade. That has kind of like a duckbill kind of face. This one does not have a duckbill kind of face. It has like a pointed nose with really long, slender lower jaws. I don't really know if we think it does anything like this. Do you know this pelican thing just nonsense?
It was one of the possible things brought up, but I think they're still.
Because there's no teeth, right?
Yeah.
It's edentulous. It has no teeth in its mouth. It's got a row of armor just on the very top of its back. I don't know why. Big flippery adaptations, but are different from these guys. These thalattosaurs have these heavy bones. Some of you yesterday were talking in class about, or lab about the marine reptiles that kind of get these bones that are dense. A lot of marine tetrapods, mammals, reptiles, some birds, when they go marine, their bones get heavier. They intentionally make their bones heavy. And that's almost certainly to be a counterbalance for the fact that they're breathing. They're filling their air with lungs. When you guys swim in a pool and you take a breath, you go to the surface. You might want to do that, but if you're a marine organism, you probably want to spend your time underwater, foraging, doing whatever you do. And so you have to find ways to counterbalance the fact that you are breathing air. A lot of marine lineages, once they're in the water long enough, stop it with like the really dense bone because they have other physiological things happening and other things probably in their organs to keep them dense and underwater, neutrally buoyant. But it's really interesting that this like heavy bones is something we see happen again and again and again in tetrapod evolution. So in this case, the thalattosaur's got really like thick ribs. This one doesn't, which is kind of interesting. I don't have much to say about these. Anybody else have anything they want to talk about? Again, I feel like it's my job to make you witness them because it's just so crazy. All right. They are in this bigger group though. Ichthyosaurs are the fish lizards, the one that look like dolphins. They've been famous. Some of the first fossils that ever got found by Western science and like put in museums and had people wondering were ichthyosaurs. And so those two taxa, thalattosaurs and pupasuchians, are probably relatives of this clade called ichthyosaurs. But ichthyosaurs are easily like one of the most famous fossil lineages, period, let alone fossil marine reptile lineages. And so they are pretty much everywhere we have good fossils in the early part of the Triassic, in Asia, in China, Japan, and Norway. We find them here in Idaho, in Canada, all over the place. If you have early Triassic marine rocks, you have these really early ichthyosaurs. Some of these teeny tiny early ones show evidence for live birth already, like fossils of skeletons with little pups like inside the body, not in an egg. 3 or 4 of them, I think. So not a lot. In this genus here, Chaohusaurus, which no surprise is from China, there are multiple specimens that have embryos inside the rib cage. And so on a reptile adapting to live in the oceans and therefore not have to clamber up on land and have live birth is something we see in these really early marine reptiles. And it's cool to think that like these animals that are eventually going to look like dolphins come from some kind of land-living lizard-looking thing in the Permian, I would think. But when they show up, they basically look like this. Cardarhynchus is one of the absolute earliest ichthyosauromorphs. That's what the skeleton looks like. There is a drawing of it. Talk to your neighbors for a second about it's like adapting to marine environments. Like what's an adaptation for marine, what's not. I don't know. This is a really compelling animal. It's one of the best things possible about the fossil record is showing you those transitional forms. So talk to your neighbor about Cardarhynchus. What can you notice about it?
Yeah, so the stick. And then it's radius ulna, and then you start getting, you got, and that gap between like, so it's two, like 3 dots, and then the gap here. That seems to be the evidence signal of like, yeah, and you get times like start like that. The reason they have like part of not changed, that might be for, how big I don't know. But it does seem to be the true fault. When we're crossing die, it seems to be all these really sort of more have this real. Yeah. The cool thing with front is, and it's doing this page, smart shelly things, which means it's like now it's just full of those. You can't see it in this.
So I'm hearing a lot of people talking about like clambering around on land still. One of the things I think is really interesting is like what we would call the pattern of ossification. So the way they're turning their endochondral bones that start off as cartilaginous and then through their ontogeny as they grow, live their lives, that cartilage becomes bone. If you look at an animal like Cardarhynchus, here's its humerus, here's the ulna and radius, and then there's nothing really. There's a couple little blobs right there. Down here though, there's fingers. Look at Chauhosaurus, which is a little farther along in the ichthyosaur evolutionary situation. Here's that humerus, radius ulna again, radia ulna again, and then a couple little blobs, but a gap, and then here's the fingers. And so something that's happening probably in these guys is that their wrist bones and their hand bones, their metacarpals and their carpals are not really ossifying. They're of course still there in the flipper, but they're probably very smushy. And so you have like your fingers at the end is pretty rigid, and you have these bones which are rigid, but that thing is still very flexible. You can probably clamber around with it, which is really interesting. You guys are going to see later on when we get into like big ichthyosaurs that fully commit to living an oceanic life, that whole flipper becomes pretty rigid. These animals still have probably a good deal of flexibility in their flippers. Really interesting. And it's just fun to me every time. I don't get over it. And animals like this just have all the same bones in their arm that you have. They're just doing something very bizarre with their arms. Cool. Anything else? Well, you guys didn't say that. I said that. But what are you guys talking about? Any other things? Okay. I've asked you that a lot already today. So as we go into the Triassic, ichthyosaurs are easily the big scary predators of the Triassic. That big pectoral fin that was sticking into that frame of the last Chinese drawing you saw yesterday, that was a big ichthyosaur passing over everybody else. And so there are some absolutely amazing predators, long, sinuous bodies, pectoral and pelvic fins, hypocircle tails are what ichthyosaurs end up with. So the last time you guys saw a hypocircle tail, it was the anaspids, those jawless fishes that are related to today's cyclostomes, today's hagfish and lamprey, where the vertebrae go down into the the ventral lobe of the caudal fin. These animals don't have like what a fish has as a caudal fin. The backbone goes down, and then you have a fin on top to make a whole caudal fin structure, but the vertebrae going down. A hypocircle tail is in ichthyosaurs. And animals like this, the Thalato-archon, are very scary. That head is like, I can't even quite do it with my arms. That's how wide it is. And then it sticks out like this. So this is like an orca kind of animal, this big marine reptile. It's very cool. There it is, chasing down smaller ichthyosaurs. And you can see in the Triassic, they kind of have this long, serpentine looking almost body with those long tails. But then there's other giant ichthyosaurs like this one, Shonisaurus. These are some of the largest marine reptiles ever, and they get huge. There's a nice Shonisaurus relative to a person. Some of them are fully edentulous, which is pretty wild. Wonder what their ecology is. And then I was going to have Gary, because Gary did his whole master's on these guys, tell us whatever you want to tell us about giant ichthyosaurs.
So the kind of interesting story with ichthyosaurs is how quickly they get huge and they get macropredatory. So a lot of archon there shows up like 10, 12-ish million years after the Triassic or the in-perm extinction. And they kind of hold that position for a while, getting really huge. Shonisaurus is pretty cool. They show up all over the world, the Shastosaurid group, and especially up and down the entirety of what have been the west coast of Pangaea. We find them up in like Alaska, down to British Columbia, where the largest ones are, and then into Nevada, all the way down into Mexico. So they're
Just to say real quick, if you guys go to the Natural History Museum in Las Vegas, which you could do if you wanted to, they've got one of these on the wall, like a really big one on the wall. So you gotta leave the casino, but you go to the Natural History Museum in Vegas, you can see a big Shoneysaur. Okay, go ahead, sorry, Gary.
yeah, and basically they seem to fill this like huge niche of very large animals. Some of them had teeth, some of them had huge macropredatory teeth, and then some of them had no teeth. And the rest of their body plans seem to be relatively similar. There wasn't a whole lot of change other than what they're doing with their teeth. Even the skull was relatively about the same, like long nose shape. But yeah, they might be some of the first migratory super like mega marine tetrapods. That's been kind of a recent development in the science, and they go all the way up to the Triassic extinction, as my master's work is worked on.
Yeah, Gary's in Nevada. Gary's got a fossil of one of these guys that's like within very short distance of the marker bed for the end of the Triassic, the extinction. So it's really, really cool stuff. Look at I mean, this tail is fantastic. The vertebrae going down and the fin on the top of it, Jamaica caudal fin, that hypocircle tail. The ecology of animals like Shoneysaurus is often like loosely tossed towards like doing what whales must be doing today. They're like toothless baleen whales, but that's never really made a ton of sense to me because there's not like a baleen style filter feeding apparatus on these animals. Like, do people talk at all about their ecology besides just like gulping or something, or what?
Yeah, there was a big study that looked at the hyoid to see if they could do any level of like expanding their throat, and they don't seem to have a morphology for that. And there also wasn't really like the krill ecosystem, we don't think, to support something filter feeding. So they're probably eating ammonites, or the ones with bigger teeth were eating large other marine tetrapods.
I also like, sorry, just say larger marine tetrapods. Like the Letta archon, like this is its skull. This is the back of the skull right here. Sorry, this is so grainy. I should have replaced this picture. There's the eyeballs. This is dorsal view. This is lateral view. I love a marine reptile skull that's like a default evil, like even though it's just their face. I think it's great. So these are some of these big ichthyosauromorphs throughout the Triassic. When you guys think of ichthyosaurs, or if you've ever seen anything about ichthyosaurs in like popular media, it's always these guys. So we'll talk about them, of course, later in class, but all throughout the Jurassic and well into the Cretaceous, dolphin-shaped ichthyosaurs are big parts of marine ecosystems. And so those are the more familiar ichthyosaurs. People say ichthyosaurs, ichthyosaur means fish lizard. People in the 1800s called them fish lizards because this is what they were finding in Europe. And that looks like a fish lizard to me, for sure. So they go talking about that hypocircle tail right there. I really like this figure. So if you look at this figure, Triassic, Jurassic, Cretaceous, time is going up. Here's our purple bar to represent the Triassic. And so you can see early on, right after the mass extinction, is when we have a diversification, like of all these different ichthyosaur lineages. Some of them, here's those Shoneysaurs you just met, are pretty large, toothless, but most of these animals still have that like sort of serpentine, long body. And it's not until you go into the next period, the Jurassic, that you start to really get that dolphin-y body plan shape. And so there are some dolphin-y ones in the Triassic, but it really doesn't really settle in hard until the Jurassic. And so here's what I was talking about earlier when I talked about the extreme adaptations of the paddles, the fins, the flippers, I guess we would call them for these ichthyosaurs. This is an ichthyosaur's hand and arm. Actually, it's the whole arm. Talk to your neighbors about this thing. What are all these bones? Which ones can you identify? Just like fossil, not a drawing of an ichthyosaur arm. Let's talk about that.
Well, you can see like how like the wrist is.
They both hyperplaned and hypertonic corpuscles and stuff. Yes, that so yeah, they seems like a lot of them start off pretty rare tons of bones, and then some of those later ones start adding. Still, there are certain automated flippers with forces. Sometimes they'll be like, it's like more, and then these guys just go crazy.
Oh, I see. Yeah. All right, so if this is an ichthyosaur, if this is an ichthyosaur's arm, what is this thing? Humerus. Okay, so then what's this? Like that is the radius of the ulna. These little circles, and then there's wrist bones, and then all the rest of these bones. I hope you guys are talking about how crazy this is. So ichthyosaurs are famous for doing this thing called hyperdactyly. So they add fingers. The highest one is there's some ichthyosaurs that have what we call 10 digits, not 5, 10. And then my favorite, more than hyperdactyly, is hyperphalange. You guys have 3, 1, 2, 3 phalanges, phalanx in your finger. And some of them have, maybe there's 10 digits, and some of those digits have more than 20 or 20 phalanges in them. And so what I like about that is they're adding all those bones, but it's making like a super rigid structure. So it's like such a fun way to do that. We do not think that these flukes have like almost any sort of like bending potential. The bones are very like hard-sided, like almost right angles, and they fit together really, really tightly. And so this is a way, it's one option if you need to make a flipper out of an arm or a leg. I think it's a pretty extreme choice. And so it's really frustrating that we'll never get to do like Evo-Devo studies on ichthyosaurs to understand how this evolution happened. It's pretty easy in developmental biology to understand how you could add phalanges and how you could add digits. That's not weird. But like doing it like this to make what is essentially a very rigid structure is wild stuff. And I don't have anything smarter to say about that. These animals are just really remarkable. Nobody's got a hand like that. Ichthyosaur hand. Yeah, it is.
Do you think having that many bones on their faces would help for like because the sharks that today will like fight on?
Oh my gosh. What a great idea. So mating, like being able to bite onto each other's pectoral fins during the process of mating during copulation. Amazing. I would be so surprised if that was like the driver because it seems so much bigger than that and structural. But that's a fun idea. Yeah, I don't know. How would we test that? How would we test that?
I believe that the really rigid ones only show up when ichthyosaurs are pretty much just pelagic, like they're really
Meaning open ocean, full on dolphin shape.
They're like cruising the open ocean, not the ones that are in the shallower environments. So it's
So something we'll see in a lot of open ocean predators, especially later in class 2, is like, yeah, really kind of long stabilizing structures. That is a thing. Yeah, okay. Fun. Okay, so that was Ichthyosauromorpha. So contained within this bar are those Hooposuchians, the Latosaurs, and all those Ichthyopterygians you just met, leading up to these more dolphiny ichthyosaurs. They're challenged because they show up right away, and we don't know exactly what they're related to. Other marine reptile lineages, we'll talk about the Sauropterygians today. Sauropterygians have the most absurd and diverse body plans, way more so, I would argue, than the Ichthyosauromorphs. And so here's some of the ones you saw yesterday in class. I'll put a couple more up here. Talk to each other real quick about what these animals might be doing. Placodons, Tobias is on there waiting for Placodons.
so when they first found them, quite the best idea. The students and they thought that one.
With the one with.
And it's like, so it's like the first scream about it. It's like, why? How? They didn't even say it.
Okay, it's like.
Yeah.
It was that. This is why I forgot to use that. What, I'm like, oh, why?
The other two. Scratch my head. One has, yeah, one doesn't. The other one really.
It shows up pretty early. So you figure it's like it's like an entire
Yeah.
they're crazy. It just doesn't make sense.
So what I hope you guys are noticing is there's tons of amazing dietary stuff happening here. Nothosaurus, you guys saw in the lecture or in the lab yesterday, these nice like teeth that are sticking forward a little bit. They're always compared very favorably to animals today, like sea lions, living their lives like on the beaches. I love imagining beaches full of nothosaurs squabbling with each other. You guys don't know this quite yet, but maybe some really early pterosaurs flopping around like seagulls. It's a really fun thing to imagine, these ecosystems. And so, yeah, definitely this like semi-aquatic. They still have their lizardy look. They still got their arms and their legs. They're getting a little bit flippery, but they definitely can support themselves on land. So these like semi-aquatic predators, pretty understandable. Animals like this that they're related to, a Topodentatus is truly ridiculous. That animal's got this flare on its premaxilla and a little bit of its maxilla. There are so many tiny little teeth that stick up like that. So it has to be doing some kind of filtering. Is it scooping around in the mud? We don't really know. At least I'm not sure if I've heard a convincing argument for what it's up to. This animal is really fun because when it was first found, the first specimen was crushed side to side instead of flat. And so people thought it had like a mouth that went like this with like a big gap in the middle. They didn't realize it was like pointed out to the sides. But that's a funny face. That's a face I don't know if anybody else has a face like that. You guys are gonna meet a long-necked dinosaur later that has a face kind of like that, but it's a big plant eater, so it's not doing the same thing at all. That's totally acceptable and then ridiculous only in the face. And so you can think of today when you have biodiversity, like birds are a really great example, where a bird is a bird and then its beak can be crazy different shapes to have crazy different dietary ecologies, hooked, nectar, probing. And so a lot of these animals have these, what I would call conserved body plans. They all look pretty similar post-cranially, this skeleton, but then in their skull, really obvious signals for dietary specialization. That's definitely true of these animals. These are here are these placodonts. They exist all through the Triassic, but do not make it out of the Triassic. They have some really ridiculous teeth. Bryce, do you feel like you want to say anything about placodonts? I feel like you're so into it.
I just think they're awesome.
Why?
Well, you go from like these marine iguana looking things, some of them look like turtles, but aren't.
Yes, I said this yesterday, but I'll say it again. That shell has nothing to do with turtles. It's completely independent of turtles.
I mean, I just grew up really liking them because they were in a lot of like the books they're in.
Yeah. So this is a placodus, the skull and left lateral view. Here's the skull and ventral view. It's got big teeth in the maxilla. See these globby teeth? They're almost like spherical. And then on the roof of the mouth, there's also gigantic bulbous teeth. And the lower jaw has that too. The front of its face, these are just the holes because the teeth have fallen out on this specimen, but the teeth stick forward. They're because they say they're procumbent. Their teeth are sticking forward in the premaxilla, and then it's these gigantic balls of teeth basically in the mouth. So these animals are durophage, meaning they crush up shells. So they're probably picking stuff, picking clams, picking other things out of the sediment, and then crunching them up. That's a really fun ecology. And again, animals like placodus, I don't have its skeleton on here. The rest of its body looks like pretty normal lizardy body. But that face, those extreme reinforced skull and those extremely wild teeth are durophage's teeth, crushing teeth. Just super fun. So you can see how this same story of really early diversification and then like a lot of experimentation in the oceans for these marine reptiles, these sauropterygians. Now, just like at the end of like the ichthyosauromorph situation in the Triassic, we get those dolphin-shaped ichthyosaurs. Within all of this amazing ecological diversity and body disparity that has these sauropterygian, the lizard wings, at the end of the Triassic, we get the emergence of the really famous clade that makes it into the Jurassic and all the way into the Cretaceous. And that's these animals called plesiosaurs. And so you guys maybe have heard of plesiosaurs before. They're very popular companions of dinosaurs and stuff like that in like popular media. They show up near the end of the Triassic, this clade Plesiosauria, and they go on and live alongside dinosaurs. They eat dinosaurs and dinosaurs eat them all the way through the Mesozoic. And so here's a really beautiful Triassic animal, Thalassiodracon. And then here's another animal, Pistosaurus, that you can see as an early plesiosaur relative. It's not quite a plesiosaur itself. And here's its skeleton, pictures, and images. Do me a favor, this is the last one of the day. What are some differences you can notice about Thalassiodracon and early plesiosaur compared to like ichthyosaurs? There's a lot. Yes, the next.
Rolling.
And they also don't. They're gonna get some measures for us. They're just sharp, they're tail, and they're not very tiny.
Does that-
And these guys, they're huge. I mean, that could make those.
We are seeing. Yeah.
We think we can sort of this. Let's go. Well, we are the they're probably. We go. Set up for. Like a 55, kind of like.
All right, what are a couple differences? So this is marine reptiles, starting from an ancestor that probably looks really similar to the ichthyosaur thing on land, a vaguely normal lizard-looking kind of body plan, from something terrestrial in the early Triassic or the Permian. By the end of the Triassic, you guys already seen those dolphin ichthyosaurs. This thing looked completely different. And what are some things you guys are talking about? I heard the neck. Yes, ichthyosaurs don't have much of a neck. A lot of plesiosaurs have quite a neck. But what else?
Short tail as well, compared to the ichthyosaur.
Yes, of course, so stubby tail. What other things?
Bigger flippers.
Bigger flippers. I think one of the most, and I do mean this word, beautiful things about plesiosaurs, they're one of the only vertebrate groups, and I'm gonna stick to vertebrate groups, especially the large body-sized animals that are swimming and they're using their limbs to do it. They basically fly on four wings through the water, like they go like this, to go through their entire tens and tens of millions of years as we're gonna keep seeing them. They're not using their tails for propulsion. Almost all the reptiles that go back into the water, and most of the mammals that go back into the water, don't care about their limbs so much anymore for locomotion, they go for their tail. Whales straight up evolve a tail fin out of nothing. Manatees evolve a tail fin out of nothing. Ichthyosaurs evolve a tail fin out of nothing. These plesiosaurs might have little fins on their tails, some of them, but for the most part, their locomotion is limb driven. They're one of the only ones that do that. There's no animal, sea turtles kind of today, that are using their limbs to do all of their swimming. And they were probably doing it in a way that no other animal, certainly today, we could look at to understand. So these are very sculpted, they're almost equal. That's a humerus, that's a femur. That's so cool. Tibia and fibula, radius and all of them, but look at those shapes. Right, they have like four structures, like a quadcopter kind of thing. Really, really interesting. Massive limb girdles, massive pelvic girdle, massive pectoral girdle to hold huge muscles to do that. It's so cool. Anything else people thinking of? People talking about? All right. Well, I want to be sensitive at your time. And I will see you guys on Thursday when we will go up on the land in the Triassic.
I'm just